How's it going, everyone? I'm Rusty with FC Piero, and I'm here to show you how to replace the spark plugs and ignition coils in your B9 Audi A4. In today's DIY, we are going to be replacing the spark plugs as well as the ignition coils. It is common for the ignition coils to fail, and the spark plugs are a maintenance item. Generally, about 40,000 miles or 6 years on this particular 2-liter A4 is the recommended replacement. The ignition coils are kind of a preventative thing. However, if you have any misfires, maybe some faults like a P0300, 301, 302, 303, or 304, you may have an ignition coil that is failing or intermittently causing those misfires. The spark plugs are generally not going to cause a misfire, as you are supposed to replace them before anything does happen. However, it definitely can occur. You can have a faulty spark plug, so something to consider when you're going through with this service. And we obviously have many options here at fcpiero.com. We have the Borg-Warner Buru ignition coils, the Bosch spark plugs, as well as the NGK option, and we're going to be going ahead with the Eldor ignition coils and the NGK spark plugs, as that's probably what we're going to be taking out of this vehicle as you see in this video. So with that, let's talk about some tools we're going to need to take care of the job, and let's get into it. Now, being that this is a super simple DIY, we won't need too many tools. However, there are a couple of specific tools we will need for this DIY. I'll be using a small impact gun to make quick work of disassembly and reassembly. However, it is not necessary. A 3/8 wrench to accompany the CTA 7656, which is a 16mm spark plug socket, which has a rubber boot on the inside and an extension built into it, which will make quick work of the spark plug removal. You could certainly get away with a regular 16mm socket. However, this is a nice option to have. We also have a 10mm socket, a 10mm wrench, which I've shaved down slightly to accompany the hardware on top of this engine, along with a 90-degree pick, or you could certainly get away with a pocket screwdriver. Additionally, an option which is really nice to have is the CTA 7390, which is going to make quick work of removing those factory ignition coils. And with that, let's go ahead and get into it. First step in this DIY, we're going to go ahead and pull the engine cover off. It is rather flexible, so just kind of bend it up and out of the way, and it'll be popping off of the stands on top of the intake manifold and the engine cover. Next step, we're going to be taking off the harness connectors on the ignition coils, as well as a couple of the surrounding harnesses. I do like to use a little 90-degree pick, but you can certainly get away with a small pocket screwdriver. The evap solenoid here does have a connector that does have a plastic lock. You got to pull the lock back and then depress the lock in order to disengage. On all these ignition coils, there will be little red lock tabs. You'll have to disengage those first. And then we can go back in and with the pick carefully pull the harness back, releasing it. And we can get them all wiggled off one at a time, and then we can pull them all at the same time. The harness right here is going to be attached by a small plastic clip in the front. And if we just pull that away from that solenoid, it'll give us just enough room to pull that back. So these are almost fully released. They do have a little tension from the 10mm nuts on the ground straps, so we'll go ahead and carefully remove those next. The ground strap is held down by a 10mm, and then there's a 10mm stud that actually holds down the ignition coil to the top of the engine. The reason I'm being so specific about this is if you go to just release this one without counter holding the bottom one, you can spin the ground around in a circle and separate it from the main harness. So we do want to be careful. We do want to keep a little bit of a counter hold on it. And go ahead and release all 4 of those 10mm nuts, pulling the strap out, giving yourself a little bit more release on that harness up top. Once you get the ground straps off of all the studs, you will have just enough room to manipulate the harness behind the ignition coils, and you're still able to leave most of it intact and squeeze the ignition coils out from underneath. Get these studs out of here. And if you're having any difficulty removing these, as the ignition coil can separate from the boot and you don't want to use anything sharp to remove the boot, we do recommend using the special tool for removing the ignition coils from CTA, which is the CTA 7390. This does simply insert where you just removed that 10mm stud, and then you counterclockwise tighten, which will move this knurled knob further up here, opening the fingers on the bottom, holding that ignition coil, and giving yourself a nice handle to kind of wiggle these out. As you can see, there was a little bit of resistance in there, and it's very nice to have a good handle on there, so we'll proceed to do that for the rest of the ignition coils. And once we have all the ignition coils out of the way, we will need a 16mm spark plug socket in order to go ahead and release all the spark plugs. All right, and that is the spark plug removal on the B9 2-liter Audi A4. These spark plugs definitely have been replaced once before. With having 60,000 miles in, I don't think these are original plugs. They're still in fairly good shape. A lot of times when the vehicle approaches the time for service, you'll get some carbon tracking around here. You'll get some brown staining around the bottom of the porcelain. But again, these may have been replaced at the 40,000 mile mark. So let's go ahead and get some new plugs in here and get it all back together. Now we're going to go ahead and install our new spark plugs. One thing to keep in mind is they do come pre-gapped. However, you do want to keep in mind that the electrode should be at least a few millimeters away from the electrode. If these did happen to get damaged in shipping or anything, you may have the electrode touching the main spark plug, so just keep that in mind before you put them in. The spark plug socket I'm using from CTA does have a little rubber bushing in there, which will keep it intact when you're going to drop these in. So this is nice and handy to have, and it does come with an extension that is equipped perfect for this vehicle application. I'm going to put these in by hand, and we'll go back and torque them once we get them all in place. Now that we've got all the spark plugs installed, we're going to go back and torque them down to spec. The torque spec on these spark plugs is about 27.5 Newton meters. I understand not everyone's torque wrench is going to be able to go to that half mark, so you can certainly over torque them by a half Newton meter. It's not going to hurt anything at 28 Newton meters. With the 16mm CTA spark plug socket with that nice extension. The nice thing about these ignition coils, along with the Buru ones we had on the table, is they do come pre-greased with the factory green ignition coil grease. No need to add any additional grease or worry that they're going to get stuck on there in the future. We'll go ahead and slip these all on the new spark plugs. Once they're all firmly seated, you can slide that ignition coil harness back on there. We did have that harness looped around that evap line here. We can go ahead and drop in those 10mm studs. Once you have all those studs reinstalled, we're going to torque them down to 9 Newton meters. Then we can drop those ground straps back onto the studs. Click your harnesses back into place, and don't forget to engage the red lock tabs. We did have that one harness for the evap sensor we removed. Go ahead and put those 10mm back on top of those ground straps. And just like when we remove them, be sure to counter hold these when you're snugging these up. These are also going to be torqued to 9 Newton meters. All right, other than the engine cover, that pretty much wraps up the DIY. Obviously, before you close the hood and throw the engine cover back on, you want to make sure the car starts and runs without any misfires, but we should be all right here. I'll grab the engine cover and we'll wrap this up. All right, that pretty much takes care of today's DIY on the ignition service on our B9 Audi A4, equipped with a 2-liter engine. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If so, don't forget to hit that like button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them down in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll have plenty more videos on this vehicle and many others like it. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.